People, we're back in Portsmouth, and this week we've got questions for Philip Carr, the founder of Forseti Training.
Every time you go on duty, you're aware that you just need to deal with what's put in front of you. I've seen people collapse through drug misuse, the alcohol abuse, epileptic fits. And I remember I was holding the guy's head still, trying to keep him calm and everything else. And when the paramedics went up, we let go, and you actually physically saw skin on his face move. When you're dealing with things like terror events, you don't know what injuries you're going to face. The unfortunate thing is, we are seeing them more and more in places where people don't realise. Nightclubs, pubs, restaurants, even certain clothing stores. The ambulance service do an amazing job, but they're stretched. The response for a critical call is supposed to be 7 minutes. Last time I got the stats on it, it's like we're over 10 minutes. By getting things like bleed kits and defibrillators into their venues at costs that they can absorb, if it saves one life, I'll be a happy man because it's achieved its job.
Oh, so Phil, Philip or Phil? Is it
Phil?
Phil. All right, Phil. So the What's Going On show. Welcome on the show, man. It's good to have you on. I'm excited for this one. And so yeah, on the What's Going On show, we have this tradition where we let the guest basically say who they are. So instead of me giving you an elaborate introduction, I like to just hand it over to you. So in a nutshell, who is Phil Carr?
So I guess we're all some of our parts. I've worked in quite a few industries, from the fast food sector to
and so yeah, on the What's Going On show, we have this tradition where we let the guest basically say who they are. So instead of me giving you an elaborate introduction, I like to just hand it over to you. So in a nutshell, who is Phil Carr?
So I guess we're all some of our parts. I've worked in quite a few industries, from the fast food sector to spent near 30 years in various different security roles. I've done nighttime economy work since the days of Fifth Avenue on the seafront, all the way through till still doing it now. And I've seen how that's changed and everything else. And for the last few years, I've moved into training, started our own company, and we're trying to make a difference with what we're doing with that.
Okay. All right. So take me back then. So whereabouts did you grow up?
So, local lad, grew up in Portsmouth, in Stampshaw.
Okay.
3 brothers, mum and dad separated, so that was a bit of a tough time for my mum. You can imagine with 4 boys in a house, she was the only woman. It wasn't probably the easiest at times, and like brothers, we love each other, but we don't always see eye to eye. Got a bit rambunctious, and then as I got older, I stopped being so quiet. I got quite big, and someone said, "Oh, you should give it a shot, going to be a doorman. You're a bit of a lump." And not long after my 18th birthday, I found myself working shift down at Fifth Avenue, which was a bit eye-opening at the start, and it's just something I've grown into.
Okay, Fifth Avenue, what or where is that? Yeah.
So along the seafront in Portsmouth, there used to be what's now the retirement home where the co-op is, just opposite Southbury Pier.
Yeah.
That used to be, my parents remember it as Ritz's, some people remember it as Nero's. For my generation, it was Fifth Avenue, and Zoom and Basement, Joanna's, and it became Bar Blue and Tangerine Street. I think it was called Fanshaw's before that. And then they became Time and Envy. What was it? Zoom and Basement. I can't remember. Lush and Bliss stayed as Joanna's, and it became Bar Blue. And then eventually they moved the seafront away, and it's now all been stripped down, and depending on which stories you believe, and the old casino burning down or burnt down. And it's now a retirement complex.
Okay.
With a little co-op there, which every time I go past, I still see the old clubs and the old nighttime economy down there.
Yeah. Was it better down there on the seafront, or do you think it's better now?
I think the nighttime economy, I think the clubbing experience was a lot different back then.
Okay.
So people were going out 7-8 o'clock in the evening. They'd go to pubs and everything else. Guildhall was always packed by about 8:30. If you weren't kind of in a venue by that point, then you had issues. And then 10, half 10, everyone started pouring down to the seafront for the late night clubs. And yeah, it was a lot different. But then at 2 o'clock, when every club kicked out at the same time, all of a sudden you'd have the best part of like 3,000-4,000 people trying to come out of a small area, and the police were lined up across one side of the road, and all the various different doormen were kicking out the venues and lined up the other side, and it was just a lot of mess down there.
Imagine.
So
I can imagine. We'll dive into there in a sec. So, all right. So you said you grew up with three brothers. You said that bit hands-on, a bit rough and tumble. So how was you through school? Did you like it, or how was it?
So I used to annoy my teachers because I always found subjects like maths quite easy, but I didn't enjoy school.
Okay.
So my attendance wasn't the best. I think that's about the best way to put that. But it used to annoy me when teachers would then try and catch me out. Oh, if you be here, you know this, and give me a problem, and I'd just answer it.
Okay.
And that used to infuriate them more because they could see potential in me that at the time, obviously I was like 14, 15, 16, I didn't see that. So I did join the Army Cadet Force when I was in my secondary school, and I loved that. I loved what that entailed. So for me, I was kind of like, yeah, going to leave school and go and join the Army, and yeah, wanted to go and fly helicopters. That was where I saw myself being, and it wasn't until I went down to the recruitment centre and they were like, they'd done my aptitude test, scored exceptionally well. They were kind of like, yeah, we want you. Like, what college did you go to? And I was like, well, I haven't. They're like, well, you're not doing anything apart from infantry unless you go and get qualifications. So I was like, okay, so I'll go and get some more fitness, get some more life experience, and think about qualifications and everything else before trying again. And in the meantime, I started at Fifth Avenue and then kind of grew to love it, and it was basically getting paid for being out 5 nights a week without hangovers. So it was a different lifestyle, and a lifestyle I'd not ever thought about, and just kind of stuck with it.
Okay, so you like that element of, would you say, what drew you to, because that would have been the Army Air Corps, wouldn't it?
Would have been Army Air Corps. I can just imagine how exhilarating it must be to be flying a helicopter. I mean, like, jets are one thing, but yeah, I'd never ever thought about the RAF. I always thought it was full of toffs and the like. Even though from Portsmouth, the Navy was definitely not an option that I was going to consider, so it really was Army. And yeah, I was like imagining myself as like the Army pilot flying the attack helicopters and doing all the cool stuff that you're starting to see in the news and everything else of those type of people. Well, I think if I had done that, then my life wouldn't be where it is. So I'm grateful for what I have now and for the path I'm on. And I think when my son grows up, that will be a path that he'll look back on and be proud of.
Okay, interesting. So, cool, you become a doorman. Did you always work at Fifth?
No, I kind of worked all over in a few different cities. I remember working over a bar called the Colonial for a little bit over in Denmead. It was a bit eye-opening, being a little bit out in the sticks. It's just a different way over there. It's a lot of locals. There's no real backup, anything to do with the police and whatnot. It's like they're never going to be there in a time that's going to make a difference. So you have to have your wits around you a lot more. And be able to deal with a vast different calibre of people in those trying situations compared to, like, say, somewhere like a Fifth Avenue where you've got 10, 15 other guys that are all on your team, so to speak. You've got police near enough outside. Moment something gets too out of hand, ambulances were all near enough always on standby, and unfortunately they were needed on more than one occasion. But yeah, every venue comes with its risks. Every time you go on duty, you're aware that something may happen, and you just can't predict what that's going to be. You just need to deal with what's put in front of you. But when you're out in the sticks, I say you have to be a little bit more on the ball in case it does go wrong.
Yeah.
And yeah, done a couple of venues down in Brighton, a couple of shifts towards Bournemouth way. Yeah.
Okay. So, as a doorman, then I'm guessing, and what you do today with Forseti Training, you probably see a lot of blood or violence or unsavory moments. Let's say. So, for you, what were some sort of marked times that you remember?
So when I'm teaching first aid, especially when I'm talking about bleeds and everything else with people, it does give me the option to revisit some of the scenarios that I've seen over the years. Unfortunately, I've been around where people have been stabbed. I've dealt with more than my fair share of glassings. One sticks in my mind quite vividly. It was a case where an 18-year-old lad glassed his best mate for getting on a microphone and cut him from one side of his face all the way down. And I remember I was holding the guy's head still, trying to keep him calm and everything else. And when the paramedics went up, we let go, and you actually physically saw skin on his face move. And the next day, I actually didn't get out of bed. I just stayed in bed. It was one of those things where, looking back now, I can appreciate why I stayed in bed and what happened. But at the time, you're just kind of I just didn't feel like welding that day. I've seen people collapse through drug misuse. Obviously, we have people that have the alcohol abuse and dealing with those, to people having epileptic fits, which I always find hard to deal with, because apart from making sure that they can't smack their head on anything and making the area safe, there's not really a lot you can do until they come out of it. So you kind of feel a bit helpless when you're dealing with them, and that's, as a first aider, trying to help someone, that's really hard emotion to deal with, is that helplessness. So,
okay.
But it has led to where we are now and what we do now, and it does give me an increased appreciation for the skills that we're trying to give people to hopefully make the world a better place.
Interesting. So, okay, on that, was there a particular moment that then led you to start up your own thing with Forseti Training?
So, I think just like everyone, it's you reach a point within your work life where you're kind of the grind is getting intolerable. And it wasn't long after COVID, I was sat there talking to the missus, and she turned around, she said to me, she said, if you are that unhappy, you need to change. And I think she could see it had reached a point where it wasn't just a grind to get up, go to work, come home, go back to work, come home, see people for a little bit in the morning, just to try and pay the bills. It become a point where I was literally forcing myself out of a bed in the morning, and I just didn't want to. So we had that conversation, and it was a case of trying to unlock some of my past experiences. What could I do that I actually enjoyed doing? And I remember a time I worked for McDonald's, and I used to do training, help training up crew trainers, managers and everything, and I remember it quite fondly. So we spoke to the missus, and she's like, well, let's look into doing that. And I got my basic teaching qualifications to do vocational training, and the quickest way into it was through first aid. And I was like, okay, I've been a first aider in the workplace for the best part of 30 years. It's something I know a little bit about, so yeah. So started to get into my first aid training, and the goal was always to expand the company to offer things like security training, alcohol license training, various different other qualifications, health and safety, food safety and everything else, to be able to make a business out of it. And just kind of fell in with the first aid and kind of really found a passion for it, and it's just over the last couple of years just really developed not just my knowledge but my practices and my understanding and a greater scheme of looking at where the world is now and the help that it really does need.
I can imagine. Okay, touched on your wife there, and has she been with you through the whole process of when you became a doorman? And because the only thing I'm really touching on there is when you said you couldn't get out of bed, and you said again when you actually thought of your business, that she said you're not happy. So how much of a rock has your wife been in all of this?
Oh, absolutely immense. There's no two ways about it. It's easy to be brave when it's just you. But when you have your family to consider, you need your other partner to be that rock, because there are times, and I still have times when I question what I'm doing. I'm kind of like, am I trying to preach to the converted? You suffer a little bit of like fraud syndrome. You kind of there thinking, am I really the person that's doing this? Am I the one that needs to be like the poster boy and saying this? Do I have the right to do that? And she provides a sounding board for me. She drives me on, and even she would turn around and say to you, the man I am today is so different from 2.5, 3 years ago when we made the decision to move on this. And she remembers me from 8 or so years ago, when she met me, and she's been an absolute rock through. I've had back surgery, through times of COVID with our son. She's been an amazing mum, and she's enabled me to be able to do this, and she still supports me and gives me encouragement. And although she doesn't believe it, she actually provides some of the inspirations for some of the things we're doing, because she thinks how everyone in the street would think, rather than how I see things from my ways as a doorman and security. I see it kind of like in a one-way street, whereas she can see what other people see. So it really brings everything together, and I guess without her, I don't think me or Forseti would be where we are.
Okay, all right, interesting. And so when you actually was a doorman and you met your wife, how did family change how you was at work? Because how was you before and how was you after?
So one thing people don't understand about doorman is those of us that have been doing it for, I normally say it's about a 2-year cut-off mark. You can do it for up to about 2 years, and then you kind of know whether it's for you or not. Okay. And then people either leave the industry or they end up being near enough lifers. But after that 2-year mark, you kind of developed an ability to cope with things through separating them. So people know me as Phil the doorman, will have no idea just normally how laid back and how placid I am as Phil the father or husband, or just Phil in general. I think you have to have that separation, otherwise some of the things we see, some of the things we do, and some of the people we deal with on the door would literally push a lot of people over the edge. And I think that's an unspoken about part of that job that people don't get.
Interesting. So who was Phil on the door?
Depends on who you talk to. It depends on we do that. I normally like to think of myself as a mirror. So if people come to me in a kind and compassionate way, I'll try and help them where I can, whether it be explaining why we're doing what we're doing, if that's refusing them, giving them options and everything else, to obviously dealing with the other side of things, which unfortunately is part and parcel of the job. I try not to bring it home with me, but there are the occasions where it does. And just like anyone else, it's I don't like when the two worlds merge. So I try to keep my door work separate from my personal life, and it can prove a struggle at times, but my greatest fear is that my wife or my son will ever see me having to deal with a situation that I have to as a doorman, and think negative of me for having to do some of the things we have to do to get the right outcome.
Really?
So
could you tell me some of the things?
We're not doing anything illegal, just kind of like when you're dealing with violent situations, having to use force, especially when you're a big guy and you're trying to do things, and that involves, it could be involved raising your voice, using different tones and everything else. And I certainly don't want my son to ever look at me with a look of fear. And the same with my wife. And it concerns me that if they saw me having to raise my aggression levels to deal with a situation, that they would develop some form of fear of me, and I never want that.
Understandable. To get that level of aggression, did you do any training?
So back in the day, and I sound really old when I say that now. Portsmouth Council had an amazing training programme for door staff, and it was really focused around what you would be doing as a doorman. So they had a licensing officer come in and talk to you about alcohol licensing and teach you all about that. And they had a police drugs officer come in. I always remember that session because literally the first thing he did was whip out this big board, stick it there, and it's like, right, this drug is this drug is this, and it was the actual drugs in a packet on the board.
Okay.
And then he'd go through and explain how they reacted in the body, the type of behaviours that they cause, and also kind of like the warning signs as to what to look for and how certain drugs were, in his words, when he talked about things like ecstasy, a Russian roulette drug, and when he explained about the process behind how that actually negatively affects people, it kind of opens your eyes. And then before they would let you go and sign off your training, you went for training with the police on use of force, who gave you an understanding of the law and what you're enacting. And doormen do have no added extra powers, contrary to what some may tell you, but they do have a good understanding of reasonable force and its use. And the police were very good at teaching us techniques to use back then. And obviously the police use those techniques, so they're probably the best people to teach us. I'm not saying that the training now is not fit for purpose. Training now is it's a lot more in depth, but there are things that I would like to see come back into training, like around the drugs and everything else, rather than just a rhetoric of drugs are bad. Okay. And yeah, I mean, like the physical intervention before, I think we were about 2.5, 3 hours, whereas now it's a day and a half, near enough that you spend about on the theory and the practical application of physical intervention. But it also teaches you a lot about conflict management and how to talk situations down, and so there's a lot more to it now, but I think we have lost some skills which weren't necessary back then.
Interesting. You said there that ecstasy was a Russian roulette drug. What do you mean by that?
So a lot of people don't see the harm in ecstasy. I mean, you need to remember that most of the drug deaths that we see from festivals, the ones at Mutiny, the famous, infamous Leah Betts, and everything else, they all died from ecstasy overdose. But the problem is ecstasy is cut with various different substances, and you don't know what those substances are. But when you have a negative reaction to ecstasy, one of the things that can happen is you get a bleed on the brain, or pressure builds within the brain, but it builds between the skull and the brain. Now, unfortunately, when pressure builds inside your brain, or inside your skull, your brain wants to get out. The only way it can get out is down through your spinal column. So people start to lose control of their body. And obviously the end goal is that they stop breathing, but they are basically in that dying moment now in extreme agony, but they may not have control of their body to be able to do that, and they basically die for having their brain pushed down through their spinal cord. And the only way of stopping that is by relieving the pressure in the brain, which you need a hospital, and you need a surgeon there to relieve the pressure like quick. So and that can happen on half a tablet, or that can happen on like 4 tablets. You don't know. So when these kids are out there going, oh, I've done ecstasy like a million times, it's never affected me, the next half a tablet may be the one that does. And that's what I'm trying to say. I get people are looking for that escapism, and the world is not a nice place a lot of the time, but is it really worth playing Russian roulette? And I would say no. So, and again, this is kind of what they taught us back then, but that information doesn't come out because people don't like talking about that. So they'd rather have the rhetoric, drugs are bad, okay? And it's like we need to have the open conversations and educate people on how drugs are actually reacting in their body and what the dangers to their body are from doing that. And I think if people understood a lot more, then I'm not saying that we've had less issues, but I think people have a lot more understanding, and that the first time use might drop quite a bit more.
Okay. So is that why you believe that they should talk about drugs more in the training?
Yeah, so one of the things when guys come to work with me in the door, I try to teach them about how to spot some of the signs of people that are actually under the various different effects of certain drugs. Because, so we talk about cocaine is the big one that everyone seems to use quite a lot at the moment. And people can be fine on cocaine until they're not fine. And when they're not fine, it can be an issue because if they're not feeling pain, they're hyper... it's not just hyper aggressive, it's hyper emotional, and they'll swing very quickly. And afterwards, their sense of rationale returns and they're kind of realising what they've done and their behaviours. But in the meantime, is the use of force against these people. They can't really feel what's happening to them. So if you are not an experienced doorman and you're perhaps like new to using force, you can quite easily use a bit too much because they're not going to respond to it in the right way. And most guys don't even know like how to bring someone down from that type of level, how to deal with drug in a first aid sense of that. And yeah, I just think with how prevalent they are in society now, it's something that we really should be focusing on and getting those skills out there. And we are working as Forseti to build a course to try and offer to doormen and nighttime economy that they can actually educate themselves about some of these things. But these things take time and resources, so...
Interesting. Okay, so... oh, my nose. So we touched there on drugs, but like, how big of a problem are drugs in nightclubs today?
I sit on the fence on some of these. I don't think drugs... Anyone tells you that there is no drugs in their venue has got their head in the sand. There's always drugs in the venue. There's no way of stopping it. You can prevent as much as you can, and I think people need to have policies regarding it of a zero tolerance. If we believe you're under the influence of drugs, you're caught doing drugs, that's it. You're done for the night. You're gone. But there are venues out there where they'd rather just kind of shy away from the issue because it's their livelihood at the end of the day. Is that it's like if these people aren't in a venue, they're not buying drinks, and the nighttime economy is struggling massively as it is. So they kind of don't want to, or are afraid of dealing with that at the moment. Okay. But yeah, they do seem to be everywhere, and it seems that as you kind of hear about one drug coming out and then that starts to wane, then the next one is popping up. I was just reading the other day about there's new pink cocaine, which has swept the island of Ibiza and is gradually coming over here, and it's basically a mixture of cocaine, speed, and various different other amphetamines, and all into one. You're going, wow, great, that's going to be a fun one to deal with.
Yeah. Wow.
But people go to Ibiza, they're all in feel-good moods, there's no real troubles with it, so they don't see the issues. And then they come back here, and then you have the emotional issues and stress of dealing with friends, families, clashes of personalities, and everything else over here in nighttime economy. And then you start getting issues when you start mixing chemicals into that, and people's responses aren't controlled.
Yeah. Wow.
So.
Okay. Wow. So that's the issue with drugs. But obviously your business is called Forseti Training. Yep. First of all, let's just dive into that. Why is it called Forseti? Yeah.
I've always enjoyed Norse mythology. And when we set up the business, obviously we appreciated at the start. We could have gone down the route everyone goes down to, field car training. But from day one, we've gone like, no, we want this to be something bigger than just me. So we needed a brand. My love of Norse mythology is kind of all around, and I just started looking through at some of the things and everything else. Air is the Norse god of medicine, but that's already taken. And I just saw the name Forseti, and when I looked at it, it says it's the Norse god of justice and fairness. I was kind of like, you know what? If all's fair in life, then people wouldn't have bad stuff happen to them. And then when I looked at the rune, I was just kind of like, you know what? Everything just felt right. And I said it to the missus, and she's like, that's the one. And yeah, some people do find it a little strange, but as soon as they get used to it, they're like, yeah, no, that is kind of like me, and it is memorable, and the logo is quite easy for people to remember. So yeah, it just works. Quite happy with that, and yeah, I think it's apt in reflection of me as well. So
Nice, interesting. Okay, so I was touched on the drugs, touched on Forseti, the reason behind the brand. What is the need then for defibrillators in venues?
So it's not just venues; it's kind of everywhere. So we do have defibrillators out and about as it is. So where I work now, there's 2 public access defibrillators. So you turn around and say, well, if you've got 2, well, not surely that should be enough. But the thing is, it's when you make have an incident. First off, you have the response to that, okay, which takes a few seconds. Then you obviously have to go through your checks and everything else to actually ascertain whether they are breathing and everything else. And by the time you get to it and decide you need a defibrillator, you've either got to call the ambulance, okay, and they'll tell you where the nearest one is, or you've got to get someone to call the ambulance for you and actually have them turn around and say, the nearest public access defibrillator is here. Then all those cabinets are locked, so they have to give you the code for that cabinet. Once you then get into the cabinet, you're then praying that the last person that's needed it has actually returned it. And we do see that quite often, not as people don't return the defibrillators after they've used them. So the people that are in charge of looking after those, the guardians, can't replace the batteries, can't replace the pads, and the next person that needs it, it's not there. Okay. And time matters. It's roughly every minute that we delay on getting a defibrillator in, we see success rates drop by about 10%. Now, that would never stop us if we reach over the 10-minute mark of trying. There's a famous clip that most first aid trainers use on their courses of a Bondi Beach episode, where the lifeguards end up using one for a guy that turns out had been in the water for 15-20 minutes, and they successfully revive him. Even though he's been face down in the water for 15-20 minutes, they successfully revive him, and he makes a full recovery with no brain injuries or anything else, which is absolutely fantastic and a good advent for them.
Okay.
But time is critical. And what we're seeing is, with the advent of a lot of events now that cause people to need these, whether it's just general heart attacks or those events such as things like the Manchester Arena bombing, the Southport incident, we had the firework incident with the young 15-year-old lad, I think I was up by Newcastle in the new year.
What happened there?
Where he was actually stabbed at the fireworks. He was just there with his family, and just, yeah, there was an issue, and he was stabbed. All these things means that we are getting more life-critical situations, and where the time that it takes for us to respond needs to come down. The ambulance service do an amazing job. There is no doubt about it. Take my hats off to them. I think they're amazing. They deserve every single penny they get and more. But they're stretched. The response for a P1 call, critical call, is supposed to be 7 minutes. Even down here, last time I got the stats and whatnot, it's like we're over 10 minutes. It's like, so our job as first aiders and those people are responsible is to get life-saving care to them as quick as we can. And if I can help venues by getting things like bleed kits and defibrillators into their venues at costs that they can absorb, if it saves one life, I'll be a happy man, because it's achieved its job. And the thing with defibrillators is, and I need to stress this, is you don't need training to use them. There's this myth going around that people feel that they need to have training because they see defibrillator courses or AED courses, so they feel they need to be trained on it. No one needs to be trained on a defibrillator. A defibrillator shows you and tells you exactly what to do, and if you do it slightly wrong, it will adjust itself to actually perform anyway. So if you put the pad that's supposed to go up here, down here, and vice versa, it will realise that. If you put the pads on a child which go front and back, and you don't switch the machine to child, it will realise that the pads are like that and automatically switch itself to child. So these machines are very smart, they know what they're doing.
Interesting.
But the latest stats are that in situations where defibrillators were available, they were only used 10% of the time. So that's 90% of the people that could have been saved with the use of a defibrillator or given the chance were not saved.
Wow.
And you're going, that's big when you consider there's something like 75,000 cardiac arrests a year in the UK.
Really? In households and outside?
Yeah.
Wow.
And the survival rate for out of care scenarios is very low. And it's not that we don't have the capabilities to deal with these, it's people will hear a myth, or they will see things like a course for an AED and go, well, I can't use one. It's like, you can. It's like, please do. It's like, if I know first aid and I'm struggling, I can grab you and have you help me perform the compressions for CPR just by talking you through it, because something is better than nothing. But this is overshadowed by the myth that people have that everyone needs to be trained on every single item in order for it to work. I think some of that is down to that. Some of it is down to people worried about being sued for trying to help people and perhaps not getting the right result or being held accountable. But we even have laws in place for that now. It's like, we're not like certain other big countries where suing is in their culture. We have something called the SARE Act over here, which is actually designed to protect people that are actually trying to help others. So,
Wow. I didn't know that.
yeah.
I thought that would have been an issue.
No, so over here, the SARE Act is the Social Acts of Responsibility and Heroism. And basically what it says, as long as you are following the aims of first aid to preserve life, to prevent the condition getting worse, and to promote recovery, and you are following your training, so with defibrillators, you are following what the defibrillator tells you to do, okay? You cannot successfully be sued. So it's not going to stop them filing the paperwork, it's just never going to get anywhere. Because if someone's alive, because you performed CPR on them and broke their ribs and used a defibrillator on them, how is alive worse than dead?
Makes sense. Is that a new law? Or new?
It's 2015. So
Relatively.
it's relatively new, but we talk about it a lot on first aid courses, and I say to people, and they're like, oh. And I'm like, stick to your training or not. Make sure you are following those three aims, and you'll be okay. It's like, because of freedoms, we have to let people have the option of filing a lawsuit, but it just won't go anywhere. It would never be successful, because all they do is turn up with their qualification, with the unit that was used and everything else, and be like, yeah, and then that's that. But people are scared to, through this myth that they feel they've got to be trained, and then even those that are trained are worried about what they're doing, and if I do something wrong, like, if someone's not breathing, the worst that's going to happen is they stay not breathing. It's like, so, yeah.
I mean, I guess it's a tricky one, because, you know, for someone like yourself who's probably been surrounded by, you know, violence or situations where people have been in, you know, sketchy situations where they've needed this sort of help, for someone's just sort of in a nightclub, mind their own business or whatever, for them to actually take on the responsibility of possibly having to do that and it going wrong, even if it's out of their control, could have some psychological, you know, impact on them.
So on our courses we talk a lot at the end of the course about PTSD effects from people that are actually performing first aid, and how important it is that people have mechanisms and ways around them of learning how to cope with what we're doing. As I said to you earlier, when I dealt with that guy whose face was cut open and whatnot, it's like the next day I didn't get out of bed. At the time, PTSD, even, I mean, we're only going back 20 years and whatnot, it just really wasn't that big of a talked about thing. The jumps that we've made in mental health in just in the last like 20 years have been huge. But yeah, we talk a lot about that and the importance of that. But what you're saying about the night time thing, people jumping in and get involved, is two things really come to mind. It's the first off is that after the Manchester Arena, the security industry or not, after the inquest or not, decided that security are in a position to make a difference, and every security officer should now be emergency first aid at work trained. So they will know how to perform CPR and they will know how to use a defibrillator. As long as their training is legit, they will know those things. Now, currently, the critical bleed side of things is still a voluntary module under the qualification. So it's there, we can teach it, and at Forseti it's kind of one of our passions. We really go into it, we give them practical demonstrations of the stuff that we use and other stuff that's in the market, even stuff we don't use.
Okay.
So they actually understand just what a critical bleed is and how to deal with it, because when you're dealing with things like terror events, you don't know what injuries you're going to face. It's near enough a foregone conclusion that you're probably going to be doing CPR at some point, but it's what other injuries you're going to face. So security are in a position where they can make the difference.
Okay.
But not only that, I think it's about using equipment that does give the option that it's not dangerous to use if people don't quite get it right.
Right.
So it means keeping it, we use something called the KISS method. It's like, keep it simple, stupid. And the more simple it is, the better people perform under pressure with it. Even people that are trained, it's like when they're under pressure, unless you can keep them calm and in control of a situation, they will make mistakes.
Makes sense. Yeah, makes sense.
So, but you're talking about saying about people doing things. I had a situation back in the days of Time and Envy. We had a situation on a dance floor, and there was multiple people were hit with wine glasses, which, if you've ever drunk wine in the old nightclubs, the glasses were exceptionally thin, so when they break, they are like scalpels. It's unreal.
Wow.
And although the gentleman I was dealing with was the cause of the whole situation, he had been cut across his head with the wine glass, and obviously at the time I didn't have the skills that I have now, but we're taking him downstairs and through the foyer, and his head wound was gushing blood at such a rate that it was able to shoot across the lobby a good 10-15 foot and actually hit the receptionist and the other wall.
Jeez.
And we managed to get him to the floor because he was still trying to fight us, even though he was losing quite a lot of blood. And a police officer ran in, handcuffed him, and just went, "There, he's yours." And I was like, okay, well, I guess we're dealing with this then. And we've got normal first aid kit, and I just put normal dressings on there. Now that gentleman ended up spending 4 days in hospital through blood loss. And obviously what I know now was he was hit in an artery and whatnot, so he was losing quite a lot of blood. And the first aid dressing really wasn't doing that much. But we didn't have the skills back then.
Okay.
So looking at then and looking at now, and again, we're only looking at 20-25 years difference here. If I'd had the stuff that we've got back then, the outcome would have been a lot different. He certainly wouldn't have been spending 4 days in hospital through blood loss.
Wow.
So we are moving forward, and training is moving with that. But people need to know that training is not the be-all and end-all. They need to step up first. And having the understanding of those laws, the understanding of the equipment, things like defibrillators and bleed kits and everything else is critical to that. And the more common they get, if they're in every venue, the chances are they're going to be used and they're going to make a difference.
Makes sense. So what is a bleed kit? What is a bleed kit?
So a bleed kit is a bit of a generalised term.
Okay.
What it is, we're looking at dealing with critical bleeds. So critical bleeds, or bleeds come in three stages. So you have a capillary bleed, which is kind of like in the kitchen, you cut like the end of your finger and everything else. Capillary bleeds, a bit messy, but they're not generally life-threatening. There are certain circumstances, depending on the amount of capillaries that are cut, where they would be. You're talking things like motorcyclists when they're taking off a lot of skin on accidents and things like that. You've got a lot of capillaries exposed, so the amount of blood loss from that would be critical.
Okay.
But generally what we're talking about is arterial and venous bleeds. Easy way to tell the difference is one squirts, one doesn't. So if you've got a lot of blood and it's pouring out, it's normally a venous bleed, and if it's squirting out, pumping in time with the heart, it's an arterial bleed.
No.
Both of which we have to stop. Standard first aid advice is we put pressure on the point for 10 minutes. Now that's great until you consider we're looking at situations where people may have more than one injury. So as we were talking before the interview, if you look at a knife attack, chances are if someone's attacked someone with a knife, it's not one strike. So if they've hit multiple, you need to have the ability to deal with that. So you can't put your pressure on one for 10 minutes, because that's 10 minutes you're not dealing with the other. And if you're on your own, that's hard. So bleed kits, trauma kits, depending on how you look at it and what terminology you use, they bring to the table equipment such as hemostatic agents, which are designed to enhance the body's ability to clot, to let it clot. And the one we use is a little bit different to a lot of the others on the market, but the market leader was originally developed in World War II. So if anyone's ever seen, say, something like Band of Brothers, and you see when one of them gets shot, they open up the packet and throw the white powder on someone, that's a hemostat. And that was a brand called Celox. It's probably the most widely recognised brand. And what they're designed to do is they're designed to soak up a little bit of blood, and they form a barrier which allows the blood to clot, which then stops the blood leaving the body. Obviously, our goal as first aiders with critical bleeds, we need to keep as much blood in the body as we can. The more blood we lose, the worse the situation becomes. But you also get trauma dressing. So if you've ever seen a standard first aid dressing, it's very thin, more designed for small cuts and grazes and everything else. Whereas if you've got a critical bleed, that's going to last 2 seconds and it'll literally just push straight through it. So trauma dressings are the big fat dressings. They can hold up to 500 millilitres of blood normally in a trauma dressing. So we automatically know if it soaks through one and starts to soak for a second, we've lost near half a litre of blood, we're approaching stage 3 shock, which is when the real nasty stuff starts to happen. You start getting people starting to go unconscious, their heart rate will start to slow down because their body has got no blood to kind of push round and everything else. It's kind of like the real warning side before we go into the stage where you need to have a paramedic there with a lot of air tools before to save. So having hemostats and the trauma dressings gives us options, especially when we're dealing with what we call non-compressible wounds, so head, neck and the trunk of the body. When we have multiple wounds on arms and legs, it's since the European Resuscitation Council said in 2015 that tourniquets are safe to use, and they issued some guidelines. So tourniquets can be used on arms and legs.
What tourniquets? Just for...
Tourniquets are designed to stop blood flow. So they will use pressure. You shouldn't play around with them because they hurt like hell, but the pain is temporary. Once you've actually got it on, it will actually stop the blood, and then the pain will actually stop because there'll be no blood going through there. So, but
is it like a tightening thing? Or?
So yeah, it's like a strap. You have various different ones. You can make one from a standard first aid kit if you really have to, just a triangular bandage and your shears. But our kits come with what's called a Cat T tourniquet. So it's designed, it's a strap, it's got a bar, and you literally twist the bar and it tightens it up. And then you lock the bar in place once you've tightened it up quite considerably. So they need to be quite tough because we're looking at a lot of pressure that we exert. And they have to be used in certain ways. But once they've stopped the blood flow, you've kept that person alive. Now, some of the things is people used to think, oh, if you put a tourniquet on, they're going to lose that limb. That's not true. In 2015, they done a study from the Iraq and Afghan conflict, and they actually found that no amputations were actually caused from the use of a tourniquet that was on for up to 6 hours. The tourniquet was not the reason those limbs were used. But what they did also find is that when they had a critical bleed on the compressible areas, so arms and legs, where a tourniquet was used, there was a 92% survival rate past the 24-hour mark. Whereas when a tourniquet wasn't used, the survival rate was 0. So they're not pretty and they're not nice, but they are highly effective. So when we consider the environment we're in, with instances like Manchester, with Southport, with like fireworks, for local people, there was instances at Guildhall, then they become real good critical tools that we can use to make sure that we're talking about an attack rather than a death. I guess that's kind of where we're coming from, is that we want to be talking about attacks with life-saving heroes rather than terror events where we're talking about the number of deaths instead. And the unfortunate thing is we are seeing them more and more in places where people don't realise, which is why to us, why it's so important to get these out as many places as we can. Shopping centres. My son's nursery has a bleed kit in it, and a defibrillator. Nightclubs, pubs, restaurants, even certain clothing stores. So I'm thinking like the likes of Primark. You're going to have a lot of people in there, and the more it's out there, the lower the response time. The more people we've got trained in the use of these type of things, the easier it is. You could even have a bystander that's like, I know what I'm doing with a hemostat, give that to me and actually do it. And having those skills out there is really important, and I really think by doing what we're doing, we're going to make a difference by doing that.
Wow. Just on that, obviously we probably can't know, but do you have an idea of why there are more attacks?
I think so. Obviously, as security, we have to do something called NACSO training,
Okay.
which is the National Anti-Counter-Terrorism Organisation, and they even have now an education version that teachers and schools should be doing as people how to react in an event. And what people don't realise is they go, oh, okay, a stadium, whatnot, is a big target. Someone like the Guildhall, whatnot, is a big target because it's symbolic, and all these places. But for a terrorist, the big target is the one that's going to make the most statement. The biggest statement they can make is the most casualties, and to them the most deaths. And that means that it kind of puts everyone in that fold. So you're looking at summer fetes at schools, the little church get-togethers. In Paris, the attacks, they attacked 2 restaurants and a nightclub, all under 200 capacity. Southport was a child dance school. And it's kind of like we don't know where the next attack is going to be. The services do a great job of preventing a lot of attacks, but you can't prevent the guy that's going out on his own to make a statement, because if there's no communications, there's nothing to intercept. So unless someone knows that he's doing it, there's no way of actually understanding that. And the unfortunate thing is, America has a gun problem. In the UK, we have a knife problem. In America, you can legislate guns, you can make them illegal, if you so wish. Or one of my favourite comedians, Chris Rock, turned around and said, we don't need a gun tax, we need a bullet tax. He said, make bullets for £5,000. He said, then see how many accidental shootings you've got then. And although it was a joke and whatnot, it's kind of like rings a bit true. It's like, if you can't get a bullet, what's the point of having a gun? Yeah. So, but over here, it's knives. You can walk into a shop and buy a kitchen knife. It doesn't have to be a hunting zombie style knife, and I do think they need to be banned. Yeah. There is no reason to ever have one of those. If you feel the need, you wish to display one on your wall, then get a plastic one. Have a plastic one. We can make them look like the real thing. If that's your thing, that's your thing. But do we need weapons like that floating around the streets? Do we need swords? No. But how can you stop someone going to their kitchen drawer and picking up the kitchen knife and go and do what they're doing? Yeah. It's not just a sale of knife, it's the availability of them in everyday situations. And a lot of the people that are carrying knives now, they are carrying knives from the kitchen, and the youths are carrying knives from their mum and dad's kitchen. And it's like, how do you combat that? I don't know the answer. I'll support any initiative that involves that, but from our point of view, we're trying to look at how can we prevent an attack turning into a death. Yeah. So, wow. But the training is out there that can make a difference. We understand some of the things that's driving it, but we can't stop everything. And it's about being prepared for that should that happen. And the new law coming out will force some people to be prepared, as long as the MPs, and excuse the crudeness here, as long as the MPs have the balls to actually give the law the merit that it deserves, and don't water it down till it basically matches current legislation, things like health and safety, where a risk assessment is enough. We need to be mandating what people actually have to have in their business, and what training they should be doing. So
That's a fair point. And bit off topic, but not. What are your views on like man's or humans' innate desire for battle and war?
I think it's quite weird because man is capable of the utmost beauty, and we are so creative and so imaginative, but we seem so hell bent on destroying ourselves at the same time. I'm guessing it's like you turn around and say you can't have one without the other. I wish we could, but I don't know how you would change that. I think we need to develop a certain amount of tolerance. There's a lot of woe betide me and everyone should bend to my will in the world now, rather than just people accepting people for who they are. We seem to feel the need to force our viewpoints on everyone. And I guess it kind of like boils down to, it's kind of like, you have your life, I have mine. Be nice, but don't tell me how to live my life. As long as I'm not hurting people, what's the harm? If I want to walk around and dress a certain way, if I want to believe in a certain faith, that's my option. But that doesn't mean that we can't be friends. So educate, be willing to have open conversations. There's nothing wrong with having a conversation. I hate bringing religion into things, but it's the easiest one that people can relate to. So I've had conversations with Muslim guys, quite open and honest conversations, very chilled and everything else about various different things. And people have tried to interject in those conversations and accused me of being a racist because I didn't agree with the Muslim's point of view. And my Muslim friend actually stood there and he turned around and said, "Who the hell are you to turn around and tell him what he cannot talk to his friend about?" He said, if it's his religion and he's not offended, what's the problem? And I think there's a lot of people are scared to talk, and a lot of people are hell bent from every angle on forcing their viewpoint on someone else. I think we just need to learn a bit of tolerance, a bit of acceptance that we are all different. We are all going to have different ideologies, and just learn to kind of like embrace that a little and get along a bit, and don't force it on others. But yeah, as long as you're not hurting anyone, you crack on.
Nice.
So I don't think there's any other way I could kind of word that without yeah.
That's a fair point. Okay, cool. So, wrapping up on this section. So, cool. Forseti Training, currently trying to get it in all possible venues, all possible places. You kind of touched on the future vision, but where do you see it? Do you plan ahead?
Yeah, so from the moment we got into Forseti Training, we were made aware of the upcoming Martin's Law.
What's that?
So it's commonly known as Martin's Law. It's named after Martin Het, whose mum, Figure Murray, has been a driving force behind it, which is absolutely amazing, and she really wants to make things safer. And it all comes down from the Manchester Arena bombing. He was one of the victims there.
Okay.
And it was highly evident some of the things that have changed from that. I'd say the SIA making sure that all security operatives are first aid trained and everything else. But what, from a first aid point of view, is the first draft of the law was published, and the select committee, first thing they turned around and said is no. They felt very strong about this. It's like, we want it mandated in there that anyone that this law applies to must have people with life-saving skills on duty at all times. So they stopped short of turning around saying the first aid at work qualification, because what they want is kind of people to ascertain the ability to determine what level of training they need.
Okay.
But to have life-saving training, if people are in a position where they can make a difference, they should have the skills to make that difference. So if you're going to have a pub that's got 150 people in, you really should have someone there that knows what they're doing. And that boils down to equipment as well. But current health and safety guidelines is someone has to do a risk assessment, and then they go through and do a risk assessment, and they can, for all intents and purposes, just want to say, okay, so we need a first aid kit in here, and it needs to be this size. And Jack Jones is responsible for making sure the kit is stocked and in date. And that's it. And until something goes wrong, that risk assessment is not called into question. And when something does go wrong, like the Manchester inquiry, that's when we kind of realise going, you know what, the risk assessments are not kind of fit for purpose here. It's like you walk into most nighttime venues and most like larger pub chains, and the whole policy around first aid is, there's a first aid kit, do you want us to call you an ambulance? I'm not going to name them. There are some out there that specifically do not have first aid trained staff for that reason. Because again, what we spoke about before, about they don't want the liability and everything else. And it's kind of sad that it's that way. And this is what Thomas said about the MPs having the balls to actually see this through and actually give it the metal it needs. Labour has put it to Parliament last week, the first draft, and obviously it will go through a few iterations. But from my perspective, is what I want them to stand by that. I want them to make sure that people do have life-saving skills as part of a core of this. They need to make sure that businesses reach a certain standard when we're talking about the grouping together of people. They've also changed the limit. So before they were talking about anywhere where 100 people or more, they've now upped that to 200 people or more. Where if you go, just take like Palmerston Road, for example, a lot of the venues that would have been affected, that is now going to be cut in half, because some of the smaller venues now will not have to comply. And it's not about punishing these venues and whatnot. They should put it out there. But that's part of the reason why we do our kits or not, is because the training is important, but you need to consider the business aspect. And if you turn around and say to a business it's going to cost you £5,000 to put all of this stuff in your venue, they're just going to either cut the capacity of their venue or just shut, because they're not going to afford it. So part of my goal was to give them the skills and the equipment at a price that makes sense, that they can't turn around and say, that's too expensive for us to potentially save a life. So we as a company, we try and do that. We'll always try and work with a company or a group of people to make that happen. But yeah, it's hard. That law can really make a difference, but it has to mandate that we need to be able to deal. We need to have people with life-saving skills, and they need to have the equipment to actually deal with the type of wounds that they're going to face. And we are talking like critical bleeds and CPR situations. So we pack extras in there, things like burn gels and everything else, although we know that the best advice for burns is running water. But sometimes when you're dealing with a mass situation, putting a burn gel patch on for 5-10 minutes is going to help you manage that casualty to then be able to get running water in the first place. So we do try and look at the practicalities as everything else. But the law will change things, and for us, we're really hoping that that's going to drive on, and that we'll become known for our efforts to make that happen and to help people, and not be seen as someone that's just going to be picking the meat off the bones on the new law. And from that, the goal is obviously that Forseti will grow, and we will branch out into new areas. We're already branching out into security training, so that can then lead to other things, and eventually kind of, like it's the old Only Fools and Horses. It's like world domination. It's like be millionaires, but actually be proud of what we're doing. It's built on the fact that we want to help people and give people the skills to help other people as well. So, and I said to you, like, for me, it's, I have a young son and a wife looking on, and I want them to be proud of me. It's not just about me being happy with what I'm doing. It's about your family being proud of you. And my son's already turned around and said, someone said to him, what does your daddy do? And it's like, daddy helps people help people. I'm like, you can't put a price on that. It's like, I could sell the equipment a lot more and like make more money out of this. And it's like, no, it's like, we're a business, we need to make money, but that's the important part, is That's what drives me. So I've seen the worst that the industry, I've seen the worst that Portsmouth can throw at us. I know we can make a difference, but you know what? I know I can grow old knowing that my son is proud of the man I am.
Priceless.
Yeah.
Nice.
So
that's strong. And okay, where can we find you, and how can we get in touch?
we've got a website. What you will find on the website is we do talk about Martin's Law on there. We give the link to the Naxo site. We're not trying to convince you to come to us and do the training. It's freely available. If that's all someone does is go and do the anti-terror training, which is completely free, and understand that when they go into work, they understand the run, hide, tell method, that's going to have an effect on their workplace. Should something happen, that's going to have an effect on people's lives in that situation. Okay. That's our contact details are on there. People can buy our kits. We have different levels on there. So we have little mini bleed kits, which are designed for people just to carry if they're going out, like say in the woods or anything else, or if they want like a little like top up in their current first aid kit, just to give them the ability to deal with a small incident. Two, we have our standalone trauma bleed kits, and obviously in our big all-in-one solution, our Guardian kits, we have access to over 360 online qualifications through the website, as well as details of the current courses and qualifications. And as I say, through our contacts, which are listed on there, yeah, contact us if you're interested in corporate stuff. It's like we'll always try and work with you to make things happen. I'm actually out on Saturday with the Solent Ice Hockey Devils. Nice. Doing some first aid training for them so that they've got the right training in place. So they'll obviously receive the critical bleed side of things as well. So nice. There'll be more people going out there. Yeah, we're on social medias, Facebook. I'm a bit slow on Instagram, I've got to admit. Probably because I'm not on. Well, we are on TikTok, but it's a weird one because a lot of what we talk about is medical. They ban a lot of the stuff, so you're not allowed to. We're not allowed to put anything on TikTok Shop or anything else, which is kind of a little annoying. But at the same time, as I do understand, you can kind of put anything on TikTok, and it gets like quite a lot of attention. So, and for professional users, I'm quite active on LinkedIn. The business is on LinkedIn. But yeah, drop us a message. We'll talk to anyone, and even if we can't help you, we'll point you in the direction of someone that can. Because yes, although we're a business, we do firmly believe in if we can educate someone and push them in a direction so it makes it a safer place. That's what's important. And as I say, I've got a wife and a young son, and I want him to grow up in safety, not in a world where he's scared to go anywhere in case something happens. So it may sound a little bit corny, but it's what drives me. So when you've got like two sets of eyes on you, it's hard to fail, and I don't take my failures, my my non-successful things too well. So, but then I'm very good at shouting about the things that we do well, because yeah, that shows that there are other people out there that are starting to think like we think, that make the financials work. Because the alternative is that we're just going to have another Manchester Arena bombing. We're going to have another 7/7. We're going to have another Southport, and I don't want that to be someone I know or anyone knows that they have to go through dealing with that.
Yeah, Phil. Well, that wraps it up. So, but yeah, thank you for being a guest. Thank you for sharing your story, and I look forward to seeing what happens with Forseti.
Oh, thank you very much for interviewing me. It was a pleasure.
Lovely. All right. The second part. So yeah, this part we go out into the street, we ask questions, and yeah, we'll hear what you've got to say.
What's your experience with bouncers?
Experience of bouncers? Down this road, not so good. Generally speaking, good.
Why? What happened?
Oh, mate, I'm trying to dance. So So I've shown up in trackies, and they've gone, oh, you're not allowed that in here. You can't do that. I'm like, I get it. It's a part of the venue, it's a part of the scene, and at the end of the day, the club's still doing well, so they're obviously doing something right, but it just means it's clearly not for dancers, that venue. But generally speaking, other bouncers, they're nice. Even if you're not allowed in, they're still good to you. Generally speaking, bouncers are good. Like 95% of experience.
Your experience with bouncers?
Bouncers, I've never had a problem with them.
I've never had a problem. I know people that have, but I've never had
But
problems.
we've always been good, so it's fine.
What's your experience with bouncers?
Bouncers. Like, never really had a bad interaction with them. Do you know what I mean? So, yeah, bouncers depends. It depends on like what energy you're bringing into the event. That's where I feel like bouncers are important. Do you know what I mean? You want to keep the energy at a certain level. As soon as you feel the energy basically going over, or do you know what I mean? It's nice to have someone in. So yeah, pick up the bouncers. You know.
What's your experience, or what do you think of bouncers?
You get what you're given. Just be nice at the door. Act like a dick at the door. You know what you're going to get. So, you know.
Yeah. And so?
Well, I would hope they're there for safety reasons. Yeah, you know, control numbers and things like that. It's not sometimes what you always see, but...
Like when we used to break, before you go on the main stage, you just go clubs and we just hang out and throw on the floor. Like a little bit later on, you start noticing people like, oh no, you can't do that. That's not, I gotta say, it's not a kind of club vibe. You know, they almost kind of say, no, everyone has to dress nice and drink, and you're like, okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, we had times when they were like, oh shit, quick, catch him. Yeah. And obviously we're like, okay, he wants to catch me, I'm just gonna spin faster, so he can't catch him. So, yeah.
Experience with bouncers?
With bouncers? Oh, I used to work as one.
Oh yeah?
Yeah, a while ago.
Remember?
Some are nice, some are not. Yeah, that's my thoughts on it.
Yeah. Cool. Do you think it's more down to sort of like how the crowd's acting more than... Because you do get some who are just like, well, arseholes, but...
I think, right, so there's multiple issues across this, right? If you go to a large festival, for example, a lot of them are what we call jacket fillers. They're just people that haven't really gone through much experience as security or, you know, door staff or things like that. And they're inexperienced, they're scared, they're worried. And so then because of that, they act in the wrong way. They might remove someone in an inappropriate way and hurt them, or they might just jump to conclusions. You've also got hot-headed ones that are just looking for a ruck. To be honest, that's the reason why I got into it, because I was young, I was angry, and I wanted the legal reason to batter someone, and that is sometimes why people do it, do you know what I mean? But it can also be the environment. Like if you've had a really rubbish evening and you just keep throwing people out for the same thing, it just bothers you, so no one gets a chance, you know, it's boom, you're out. But again, there are some absolutely amazing professionals out there that know what they're doing, that look after people, because at the end of the day, that is their role. They're there to look after the public, and yeah, so more training definitely needs to go into it. Less inexperienced people, especially at large capacity events, I think.
All right. So this week, that was our question. Now, thoughts?
They're not wrong. Yeah, you do get what you give on the door. When the gentleman's saying about the energy you bring, yeah, there are certain people that do carry themselves in such a way that we do hesitate and question whether they are right for venues. We're there to maintain safety of the venue, to make sure it's compliant with various different legislations, but to also to allow people to feel safe and be safe inside. So there is a culmination of a lot of that. I think those that come into the trade, as the guy someone said there, with looking for a legal reason to batter someone, are part of the problem. I'm not turning around saying that we don't end up in physical alterations, but for most of us, that's not why we go to work. And those that do are a liability, and they're certainly not the people that we go looking to work with. But the same thing is, there are a lot of people that are working in the industry that aren't suited to it. They don't handle conflict. They don't know how to talk to people. They're scared to talk to people, and I mean, when I started in the industry as a baby-faced 18-year-old quite a long time ago, we worked in big teams, so we worked inside, so we learnt how to deal with the physical stuff from the situations when the music was loud and everything else. So we had the confidence to then approach the situations where the music wasn't playing and we could talk to people moving onto front doors. Now there's very little of that. There's very little large nighttime venues left. So a route of people coming in that may be suitable would just need to have some confidence in themselves and the ability to deal with the physical element, which will lead to confidence to be able to deal with the conflict in the first place. Because the unfortunate thing is when you are trying to deal with a conflict, if people sense that you're weak, they will seize on that. So you need to balance it between firmness, between a bit of empathy for their situation. I mean, I come from a time as well where you had to be shirt, shoes and trousers to get into a nightclub. Pubs were other things. And I do look at some of the people that are coming out now that are clubbing in what literally looks like clothes that they've lifted off their bedroom floor, that have been there for a week, and I do think to myself sometimes, come on guys, have a bit of pride in your appearance. And unfortunately, trackies do normally come into that. It's not that we're trying to alienate people that are out to dance. We're trying to encourage people to how do I say this? We want people that are there for the experience of the nighttime economy. And if you look like you literally just come straight out of the gym and you're just like there, it's not really like you're going for a night out and you're just kind of like, it's just like, to me, I always use the terms like just make a little bit of effort. It's like a lot of people now wear these I don't know what they're called, cargo pants type things. So and I'm forever looking at them and going, are they trackies? Are they cargos? I mean I even see people now coming to getting arsey because you're rejecting them from a late night venue because they're wearing football tops, and you're going, I would never dream of going to a nightclub in like a Man United top or a Liverpool top or anything else. It's kind of like, it's just not, to me it's not the done thing. But I can understand people there when, if you're working on a normal pub and you're going, no, we shut at like 12, but we don't want trackies, we don't want football tops. You're going, okay guys, you are getting those casual drinkers that are not there for like the full night, and they're not always going to be making an effort to dress up and go out. So but
I mean, on that, not on that, but with regards to like certain types of bouncers who are out to have a fight, especially with your Forseti now actually delivering the training, do you think it's probably harder to deliver the training to them individuals?
I think they are few and far between, but their impact is felt more. So if we have 50 guys come through various different courses, you might find one or two that are actually that type of person. And those one or two will make people believe through their actions that 30 or 40 of those people coming through our courses are that way. So from my experience, new door staff coming through, there are a few good ones coming through, and you can see those that they're there for the right reasons. There are still too many that are coming into the trade that are not suitable for the trade, and the majority of those are more about they're not able to deal with the situations from a physical or a verbal point of view. The guy said there about jacket fillers, it's for people that can't communicate full stop because they're scared to communicate. It's like communication is the biggest tool we have. Some of the best doormen I work with are not the biggest guys, but having a few big guys around and whatnot, it kind of like also gives an impression of safety, because people will question whether to escalate or not. There's a lot of dynamics in play, and you need to The best team I had was down at Bar 38, and we had big guys, we had small guys, we had talkers, we had mixed ethnicities, and we kind of had the person, and we can literally kind of put the right person into the right situation at the right time, and what it ended up with is that we were able to be very much blended into the crowd because we had control of the venue, which meant that people could turn up, they could have a good time, and we had a very good reputation for that. But it took a long time to develop that, and there are issues within the industry at the moment that means that those days are going to be few and far between now.
What's that?
I mean, so you can imagine that most doormen are getting paid about 50p an hour more than someone that's stacking shelves at Tesco's in the night shift. But yet that doorman is going to face physical and verbal abuse throughout most of his night. He's going to potentially dealing with situations where he's expected to save lives, to deal with people that are unconscious through too much alcohol. You're going to have to deal with people that are having domestics. You looked at my boyfriend, you looked at my girlfriend, and blah blah blah, and everything else, and then expected to go home and be okay with that for an extra 50p over someone who's going to be stacking a shelf and make sure it's stacked in the right way. So it's not really conducive to encouraging the right calibre of people at the moment. I know there's a lot of people out there that are trying their best to change those ways. And the SAA is certainly trying to increase the professionalism of the trade, and they're trying to combat training malpractice, and that comes through people reporting it in the first place. And what gets me is normally when I see someone that's working in a frontline security role that can barely speak English, and I ask myself, it's like, how have they passed the training? It's a critical skill, and it's not aimed to go against anyone or to exclude anyone deliberately, but what it is aimed to do is to make sure that people can have the right skills to deal with the situations that they're going to be facing.
It's fair enough. It is fair enough. Okay, and any last words? Any final thoughts?
No, just I mean, my goal has always been as Forseti is to make a difference. I see there are issues from training to first aid and equipment, and we're literally just trying to be part of the solution. We will try where we can to work with people on costs and everything else, because we're trying to bring big business to the table, and they will always see the numbers before the human impact. So if we can make the numbers more attractive to them, then hopefully we can have a bigger impact on the human side of things. As I say, when you got eyes looking on at you, that's massively important to me. I want my business to succeed, but I want my son to be proud of me more. So
nice. Well, Phil, thank you again, and it's been great having you on as a guest.
Right, thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, man, I'm looking forward to seeing what happens with Forseti going forward. It'll be good.
Me too.
All right, Randall. Thank you. Happy days.
Cheers.
All right, cool.